What is your favorite science fiction movie? That is not an easy question to answer. I'm not sure that I can even do it. I guess for this assignment this week, when we're thinking about science fiction and film, I'll even extend it beyond movies, as if it wasn't hard enough, and say you can also write about television series. If I ask what is my favorite science fiction television series, for me that's a lot easier. It's Star Trek: The Next Generation. I really enjoyed that series. I grew up with it, and then I rewatched it as an adult. I'm a big fan of Jean-Luc Picard. He's definitely my favorite captain.
Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise. Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise.
If you ask somebody what their favorite science fiction movie or television show is, it may not be easy to answer because there's so many of them. Some of the most famous and lucrative movie and film franchises of all time are science fiction. For example, of course, we have Star Wars. And just as an aside, in the introduction post to this course, I asked you if you were a Star Wars or Star Trek fan. When I first started the course, it seemed like a lot more people knew the difference between those things. Now it seems like maybe fewer people are familiar with Star Trek. The reason why I ask that is because Star Trek is hard science fiction and Star Wars is science fiction fantasy. And I'm just interested to see if some people say Star Wars isn't science fiction or point out that difference between those two series. They're very different and you can love both of them. I love both of them. I'm certainly not going to deny that I grew up watching some Star Wars and very much enjoying it. Some other movies that are very famous that have been, huge blockbusters that are science fiction movies. I think I mentioned Interstellar in a previous video. E.T. is a science fiction movie as well. And even at the beginning of the 20th century, there was H.G. Wells' story, War of the Worlds, which then Orson Welles converted into a radio play, which of course is not a film, but it was like the film of the time. And allegedly, the story goes that a bunch of people got scared listening to the radio and hearing this announcer describe an attack from Mars, thinking it was real. And then they learned subsequently that, of course, it was not real. But I bring this up to say that science fiction has not been just a literary genre almost, since the beginning of any other medium. As soon as there was another medium like radio that could convey science fiction, people started using it for that purpose. So rather than get into the weeds too far with trying to give you a whole history of science fiction films, what I ask you to do is each one of you to choose a movie that you think is a really important or interesting science fiction movie, or one that is maybe a little lesser known that other people may enjoy and would like to find out about. And I ask you to write up a description of that movie and talk about it a little bit in your post. And when you're done, I'll take all of your movie suggestions, I will compile them into one document, and I'll share our combined movie suggestion list with the class. Generally, we have a few entries for Blade Runner. Like I said, Star Wars makes the list, but there's so many other great science fiction movies, and every semester I encounter some new ones that I haven't seen or ones that I haven't seen referenced before. To keep the ball rolling this week and talking about what you'll be doing, I thought I would introduce a little bit about one of my favorite science fiction movie directors, and that is Andrei Tarkovsky. He was a Soviet director, and two of his films that I really enjoyed, they're kind of artsy films. If you like, Star Wars, heavy action, kind of the new Dune sort of science fiction movies, and I do. You may not be as into Tarkovsky's versions of science fiction as I am, but one of the reasons I enjoy his films so much is that he made movie versions of two of my favorite science fiction novels. One of them is Solaris by Stanislas Lem, and the other is the story that you will be reading this week, or starting to read this week, Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. Both of Tarkovsky's versions of these books were a little different than the book versions. The book version, particularly of Roadside Picnic, it includes quite a bit of action. It includes quite a bit of adventure and suspense. The movie, which Tarkovsky called Stalker, and if you played the video game series Stalker, That is, yes, it's based on Strugatsky and Stalker. The movie is based on Roadside Picnic. When you start reading this book, you'll realize that the main character, Red, is a stalker. And so he imagined a sort of existential version of the book. The book is a little bit more action-packed. But the music and the atmosphere, the framing of the shots, the pace of Stalker, it's very atmospheric. It makes you think. And if you have the patience to sit through it, it's a very long movie. It's very, very enjoyable. Solaris stayed a little closer to the novel, though I wouldn't say it stayed really close to the novel. Tarkovsky really likes atmosphere. He likes to play with nostalgia, the feeling of nostalgia, and Solaris is a novel that includes a fair dose of nostalgia. It's about an astronaut, or a cosmonaut really, who's on a space station circling a planet. The planet itself seems to be sentient, and it's able to read the astronauts' minds and project the things they're thinking back to them. The main character is a psychologist. He arrives on the space station to see that things are going very badly. A major scientist on the space station is dead. Only a couple other scientists are surviving, and they seem to be losing their minds. And next thing you know, the main character's ex-wife, who passed away, is on the space station with him. So Stanislas Lem created this pretty far-out science fiction story, and Tarkovsky used his rather unusual, atmospheric, nostalgic style of filmmaking to try to capture that story. The thing I like about those movies is that they're pretty different than the book. I like it when a film gives me something new, not just a representation of something I've already seen. If you are a fan of reading things that are an extension of a film series, there are lots of good novelizations of science fiction movies. There's a novelization of Predator. There's there are a whole series of novels based on Star Wars. You can read a whole bunch of canon Star Wars novels. There's Star Trek books. And so if you are into any of these films or those series, you can often find a novelization. And of course, something like Arrival, that movie that came out a few years ago now and won some awards. I think I mentioned in a previous video that that's based on the Ted Chiang story, Story of Your Life, that we read in this class. So if you enjoy a science fiction movie, it's often a good idea to go back and see if it's based on a story. Is it based on a book? And oftentimes the book relies on, hundreds of pages to convey a story that a movie can only really occupy in a couple hours, maybe 3 hours tops. So the level of depth you might get with the book will be greater, and you can live in that story longer and enjoy it even more. So I look forward to seeing what films you discuss. Again, if you want to write about television series, that's fine. If you want to write about Battlestar Galactica, that's totally fine, because I love Battlestar Galactica. The newer version, not so much the Star Wars ripoff from the early 80s. But I look forward to seeing what you come up with and compiling your suggestions into a list to share with everyone else.